The wind howled across the endless valley of rusted structures, carrying with it the bitter tang of ozone and cracked metal. Where once green fields and vibrant forests stood, now there remained only scorched ground and twisted remains of machines gone silent. Humanity had retreated into whatever scraps the old world left behind, repurposing steel beams, bullet-riddled plating, and ravaged engine parts. Over time, these pieces were riveted and welded together into exoskeletons tall enough to loom over the scattered dunes of dust. To see Earth's once great metropolises reduced to skeletons was a constant reminder of how fragile existence was. Blasted by scorching heat waves in one season and frozen by subarctic storms in the next, the survivors sealed themselves into these massive contraptions, hoping to outlast the planet's wrath. Each exoskeleton was a fortress in its own right. Standing nearly 20 feet high, the suits resembled ancient knights multiplied to giant proportions, with curved armor plates and a mechanical frame lined with shock absorbers. The chest compartment housed a single pilot, operating levers and foot pedals to drive the limbs. Within that cockpit, oxygen was filtered in and temperature controls offered a chance at survival against the wild extremes outside. They called them Scrapbound suits, for they were cobbled from the remains of wrecked vehicles, building girders, or leftover relics from an industrial era that had collapsed under a catastrophic climate shift. Inside her battered exosuit, a young woman named Rhea listened carefully to the wind's pitch, gauging how severe the next gust might be. She tightened her grip on the suit's locomotion handle. With the press of a lever, she tested the steel jaws clamped over each mechanical hand. Once satisfied, she wiped sweat from her brow with a rag. From the towering vantage of her cockpit, she could see the horizon rippling under a mirage, a sure sign that temperatures would spike soon. If she couldn't scavenge enough coolant or fuel before the sun's rage peaked, she risked losing the ability to walk entirely. The suits were everything: protection, transportation, and home. They were also finicky contraptions requiring constant maintenance, spare parts, and salvage. This was Rhea's shift on patrol. Each day she scuttled out in search of scrap to reinforce the settlement walls or infiltration hoses necessary to keep the coolant system clean. Every pilot had a role, and each exosuit was unique. Some wore plates from old fighter jets, while others had the angled metal of old cargo ships. Rhea's suit was decorated with riveted steel from half a dozen sources. Its right arm was a repurposed forklift assembly for heavy lifting, and the left forearm carried a torn segment of bulletproof plating her father had scavenged years ago. Her father's skill with welding had been unmatched. He was the one who understood how to balance the exoskeleton's framework, so the pilot's muscles weren't strained. But he was gone now, lost in a dust storm these exoskeletons could not withstand. His memory lingered whenever she tinkered with old rivets or replaced old valves. Though Rhea walked alone for her part of the patrol, she wasn't without support. The settlement, known only as Grenier Ridge, had once been a desert outpost, transformed into a refuge where a few hundred survivors squeezed out an existence. High walls made of ruined wind turbine blades circled the settlement. Huts and workshops, hammered together from shipping containers, lined the interior. At the center stood the forge, where blacksmiths and mechanics worked tirelessly. The forge was kept running by salvaged solar panels that dotted the rooftops, recharging the exosuit's internal batteries day after day. Without it, everyone would find themselves walking on foot, defenseless against the next ice-laden storm or scorching wind. Crossing the arid plain, Rhea peered through the small window slits of her cockpit and spotted jagged shapes half buried in the dirt, possibly the remains of a highway billboard or rusted oil tankers. A flick of a switch activated her suit's scanning sensors. They were minimal, but enough to pick up faint signals from metals or electronics. A low beep responded, confirming something worth investigating. She guided her suit forward, footsteps pounding the ground and kicking up clouds of dust. The battered servo motors groaned with each step. A part of her was always tense, anticipating the moment the suit might fail. She dreaded being stuck outside in the heat. She'd seen sun-scorched bodies in the old days before these suits. She never wanted to witness that fate again. She soon discovered, under a mound of flattened corrugated sheets, a rusting structure that might have been a shipping container. Carefully, she used the forklift arm to peel away layers of debris. Each chunk of metal squealed in protest, snapping free with metallic shrieks. To her surprise, beneath the rusted rubble lay partially intact piping and plastic tubings, still coiled. She exhaled in relief. This could be exactly what they needed back at the forge to improve the coolant lines. Nearby, she spotted a sealed crate, battered by time but still intact. She slid it free and gave it a knock. It echoed hollow. Hoping to find old mechanical parts or lubrication oil, she loaded it onto her suit's storage rack. Such finds were always precious. In a climate this unforgiving, every piece of salvage was a lifeline. The whine of static crackled in her headset. The settlement's radio. "Rhea?" The voice belonged to Jax, Grania Ridge's head mechanic. "Any luck out there?" "I found piping," she said, adjusting the radio dial, "and some kind of sealed crate. Any immediate needs back home?" Jax sighed. "We always have needs, but if you could snatch up a hydraulic pump from anywhere, would be grateful. One of the water purifiers is running at half capacity. Folks are worrying about the next wave of heat." "I'll keep looking," she promised. She trudged through the dust-laden expanse for another half hour before the sky began shifting from a bright glare to a murky, swirling haze. The wind direction changed abruptly, sending grains of sand scouring across the metallic surfaces of her suit. Rhea flicked the external temperature gauge, climbing steadily. Recalling her father's teachings, she realized a heat storm might be imminent, an event that brought searing wind powerful enough to peel paint off metal. She had perhaps half an hour before conditions became lethal outside the exosuit. In the distance, she could see the shapes of other exosuits lumbering. They belonged to her roving comrades on salvage duty. She spotted an old friend, Quinn, in a suit with a large rotating blade attached to its left arm, good for cutting through salvage and smoothing scrap. Quinn waved from the suit's vantage, spinning the blade lightly in greeting. Rhea's radio sputtered with Quinn's voice. "You seen this dust, Rhea? We might have to fall back. Heard from the settlement that it's hitting record highs out there." Rhea weighed her options. The settlement was at least a 40-minute trek away at normal speed, and these suits weren't exactly known for their agility. If they lingered too long, the waist-level temperature might skyrocket enough to boil the coolant. "Agreed," she said. "Time to head back." She pivoted her suit, carefully balancing the load of salvage. With each step, the dusty earth below felt like it was stirring with molten heat. She felt a pang of worry for others still further out. They'd have to move fast or risk being stranded. Darkness swallowed the sun in a way that wasn't nightfall, but a swirling, dusty gloom. The wind hammered her suit, and she felt each impact jostle through the pilot's seat. She turned up the fan, which circulated cooler air inside the cockpit, though the systems were clearly straining. She tapped a gauge, dangerously close to the red zone. The suits were built for this sort of punishment, but only to a point. The real danger began when you couldn't keep your core temperature stable. Water in limited supply made it doubly risky. Another crackle over the radio. "This is Quinn. My coolant lines are overheating. I'm losing mobility in the right leg actuator. Rhea, do you read me?" Her heart clenched. Quinn was only a few dozen yards away, though the swirling debris reduced visibility to nearly nothing. "Hang on, I'm close by," Rhea called. Training her sensors carefully, she tried to locate Quinn's silhouette. A faint signal formed, but the swirling dust broke it repeatedly. Finally, through the wall of amber clouds, she glimpsed the glint of Quinn's rotating blade, half stuck in the sand. "Quinn, I see you. I'm coming." She trudged ahead, bracing her exoskeleton's forklift arm in front like a shield. Each gust battered her suit, rattling the cockpit. She spotted Quinn's pinkish plating in the swirl, the metal scorched to a dull hue. Quinn's exoskeleton was hunched, as if kneeling, the right leg jammed in place. She maneuvered carefully around the swirling drifts of sand until she got close enough to speak, without radio. "Your coolant lines are shot?" Quinn grimaced from behind the cockpit glass. "Yeah, my gauges are screaming. If I move, the actuator might seize entirely, and that'd be it for me." Rhea's mind raced. They were losing precious time. She had a spare coolant tube in her salvage from the container she'd just found, but installing it out here in the middle of a heat storm was insanity. Yet leaving Quinn behind wasn't an option. She jimmied open a panel inside her cockpit, rummaging through the fresh coil of tubing until she found a short segment that might work as a temporary fix. "I'll try, but we have to be quick." Bracing her exoskeleton's forklift arm against Quinn's side, she managed to climb halfway down, hooking herself with a harness to keep from getting blasted off by the wind. Lurching forward, she pried open a small maintenance hatch on Quinn's suit, revealing a labyrinth of scorching pipes. Slipping out her multi-tool, she began to unscrew the damaged tubing. The metal was so hot it singed her glove, forcing her to work in short bursts. She placed the new tubing carefully, tightening clamps and wiping away grease. The temperature soared further. A sweat drenched her brow as the wind howled, as if furious at her defiance. By the time she finished and slammed the hatch closed, her face was red and her muscles ached. She scrambled back into her cockpit, gasping. "Try now," she said over the radio. Quinn activated the power, and the exoskeleton's leg jerked. Slowly, it lifted from the ground, and a gush of coolant hissed through the line. "It's working," said Quinn, voice heavy with relief. "Let's get out of here before it fails again." They trudged on, half blind, following the dim readout on their navigation screens. Step by step, they fought the current of scorching wind. Bits of tumbleweeds made of wire and bleached driftwood tumbled across the plain. The terrain glowed with heat waves, dancing in the air as if mocking them. Grania Ridge's battered walls emerged at last, an outline in the swirling gloom. Two watchers at the top of the settlement's walls, each in smaller lookout exoskeletons, gestured to guide the returning salvagers inside. The massive gate, a repurposed cargo jet door, creaked open, revealing the cluttered courtyard. Rhea staggered in, Quinn close behind. The settlement's residents, all clad in patchwork gear, stood by to help direct them toward the forge's sheltered bay. Mechanics rushed forward to attach coolant hoses to the suits, venting the extreme heat and preventing catastrophic meltdown. Rhea slumped back in her seat, feeling a rare sense of security as chilled air pumped through the cockpit. Inside the protective walls, Rhea could finally power down. A hush fell over the bay as the roaring wind outside became a muffled background noise. Mechanics swarmed Quinn's suit, working to replace the battered lines with better materials. Jax approached Rhea, running a hand over the fresh scorch marks on her plating. "You made it back just in time," he remarked. "We've had to seal the gates for a few hours. The heat storm will blow over eventually, but even these suits have limits." Rhea unclasped her harness and climbed out of her suit's cockpit, stiff-limbed and dehydrated. "I grabbed what I could," she said, nodding to the salvage stacked on the exosuit's platform. Jax whistled, noticing the sealed crate. He pried it open with a crowbar, rummaging through the contents: old flashlight batteries, sealed cans of sealant, a handful of mechanical gears that might fit smaller contraptions. Not the miracle hydraulic pump they needed, but a decent haul all the same. "Good work," Jack said, handing her a canteen of water. She drank greedily, the cool liquid a salve to her parched throat. The settlement's day continued under the oppressive cycle of the storm. People huddled in their makeshift abodes, listening to the shrieking winds. Out in the courtyard, coalition guards watched for any sign of damage to the walls or infiltration from opportunistic raiders. At the forge, Jax and his crew pored over the new parts, hoping to patch up the water purifier soon. Late in the evening, the wind subsided. An eerie calm settled, replaced by a suffocating heat that lingered like a fever in the air. Rhea sat outside her battered exosuit, examining the joints and wiping dust off important gauges. Her father's memory weighed on her mind. He'd always say, "We may be scrapbound, but we fight with what the world gives us." She wished he could see how she'd adapted. Quinn approached from behind, still sweaty and shaken after their close call. "You saved me back there. I owe you," said Quinn, voice trembling slightly. "We'd all be done for if we didn't have each other, right?" Rhea offered a faint smile. "This place only stands because we watch each other's backs. Night brought another shift in temperature, this time plunging from scorching heat to near freezing within hours. Clouds rolled across the sky, tinted by neon pollution. The clang of metal echoed as mechanics continued forging structural supports, scraping the dust and rust from newly acquired parts. Rhea retreated to her bunk, a small chamber in one of the old shipping containers. She let exhaustion take her, lulled by the distant hum of suits in the workshop. Dawn arrived with a slight cooling in the air, though the ground still shimmered with residual heat. Word spread quickly that a small band of outsiders was spotted on the horizon, approaching on foot. It was nearly unheard of, as nobody lasted long in that environment without an exosuit. They carried some basic gear, but definitely no towering mechanical shells. Suspicion rippled through the settlement raiders. Or refugees? The Watchers radioed to Jex, who quickly gathered a few exosuit pilots for a cautious approach. Rhea, still tired but determined, climbed into her scrapbound fortress once more. Outside the gates, 3 figures stumbled forwards, their faces covered by ragged cloth. Rhea guided her suit to the edge of a bluff overlooking them. She raised a loudspeaker, safety settings on standby in case they tried anything desperate. "Identify yourselves!" One man fell to his knees, clearly dehydrated. The other 2 held up their hands, shouting hoarsely, "We've been wandering for days, no suits. Our settlement was destroyed by an ice storm that followed a heat wave." There was an uncomfortable pause. Even grains of dust trembled around them. Rhea's sense of cautious compassion stirred. People unprotected like that couldn't be left outside. It would be a death sentence. She motioned to Quinn, who was flanking her. Quinn nodded, understanding. "Let's help them," Quinn said. "We'll take them back to the gate, but we should stay alert." Carefully, they escorted the trio back toward Grania Ridge. The main gates opened slowly, letting them pass. Medics rushed in, offering water and meager rations. While the settlement had limited resources, turning them away felt inhumane. Rhea watched from the cockpit as the strangers were led inside. One of them, a woman half-conscious from heat stroke, was lowered onto a makeshift stretcher. A spark of recognition flashed across Rhea's mind, remembering how her father once brought in a traveler in similar condition. The slightest kindness could mean the difference between life and death in this battered world. Still, not everyone in Grania Ridge was eager to embrace newcomers. Some worried that resources were already scarce, or that outsiders might harbor disease or ill intent. Tensions simmered close to the surface, but the storm repairs took priority as the settlement braced for the next climate swing. Rhea, focusing on father's old words, volunteered extra shifts with Quinn to gather medical supplies from an abandoned clinical outpost a few miles east. Perhaps they could locate antibiotics or bandages to help the newcomers recover and bolster supplies for the whole community. Early the next day, she set out with Quinn, both in their exosuits. The path led them up a cracked highway ramp, past a ruined sign that once advertised cheap motel rooms. Beyond that, the clinical outpost skeletal frames still cast haunting shadows. The ground was littered with fragments of glass and medical debris, bottles with faded labels, twisted gurneys. At the building's entrance, a steel door hung on one hinge. They forced it open with mechanical arms, stepping into a corridor thick with dust. The dim interior was a labyrinth of collapsed ceilings and debris. Their suits' floodlights illuminated a battered reception area. Rhea rummaged through drawers, prying open a locked cabinet. Inside, she found dusty vials and a few sealed boxes of bandages, all with questionable expiry, but still better than nothing. Quinn, meanwhile, carefully checked a locked storeroom. With a hydraulic hiss, Quinn tore apart what was left of the door's metal frame and discovered a trove of glass vials in a powered-down refrigeration unit. Most had shattered, but some were intact. The labels bore complex names, possibly antibiotics or vaccines. Rhea's spirit soared. You rarely stumbled upon such medical treasures anymore. They loaded the supplies onto their suits, taking care to store fragile items in padded compartments. Yet as they ventured deeper to check for more, they sensed the building tremble. A tortured groan echoed down the corridor. Dust fell from the ceiling. Rhea froze, scanning for the structural integrity reading on her suit's screen. Another quake. Then a sudden collapse as part of the second floor gave way. A hail of concrete and twisted rebar rained down. Rhea activated her forklift arm as a shield, stepping protectively in front of Quinn. The rubble slammed against her plating, denting the metal. Sparks flared. For a terrifying moment, she thought the entire building would come down. When silence returned, both suits remained standing. The hallway behind them was now impassable. "We need to get out," Quinn said, panting. Rhea nodded, carefully navigating back through the labyrinth. Every step felt like it might trigger another collapse. At last they emerged under the open sky, suits caked in dust and battered by the ordeal. Outside, they took a moment to breathe, scanning the horizon. The temperature was rising again, the sun glaring as if offended by their success. Carrying their precious cargo of medical supplies, they trundled back. Although the trek was short, each step taxed the suit's power systems, forcing them to keep the coolant lines in constant operation. Back at Grania Ridge, the guards and onlookers gawked at the battered remnants of their exoskeleton armor. Small children ran up, eyes wide with admiration, at the giant metal guardian. Rhea and Quinn carefully handed off the bandages and vials to a small team of medics, who stored them in a repurposed shipping container with rudimentary climate control. Within hours, word spread across the settlement. They had salvaged valuable medical supplies. Their resident doctor, an older man with thick, calloused hands, tested a few vials, confirming them as potent antibiotics still within safe usage range. The three strangers from the desert, recovering in a corner of the makeshift infirmary, would now have a better chance of regaining their strength. Grania Ridge's morale lifted, if only a little, in the midst of this harsh existence. Tired yet fulfilled, Rhea retired to an elevated platform near the watchtower. From there, she gazed out at the endless plains of dust and scrap. The walls that protected them were a patchwork of metal, some pieces gleaned from her father's salvage run. Every rivet, every weld told a story of survival. She thought of him again, a man who taught her to spot an opportunity in every pile of rust. If he were still here, she knew he'd remind her that preserving hope was as vital as preserving water. Quinn joined her on the platform, the two of them silent for a time, watching the sun beat down on an unyielding land. Despite the oppressive conditions, Grania Ridge still stood, and they still lived, because of these towering exoskeletons that carried them through storms, offered them vantage over the land, and gave them a chance to forge ahead together. Perhaps one day, the violent climate might relent, or the storms might subside, and humanity could reclaim life outside giant suits. But for now, as Rhea set her gaze on the worn horizon, she knew she would keep striding through the wreckage of the world, armor clanking, determined to fight the unending battle against a planet in upheaval. She would remain, as her father had taught her, a scrapbound warrior, armored against the storm and resolved to protect what little remained worth living for.